They sent the wrong mail-order bride. The stage door creaks open, and instead of the fine Boston lady the rancher ordered, a veiled stranger steps down. Mexican, maybe Apache. Gasps ripple through the crowd. The rancher curses her as false goods, but then boots thud on wood. A giant Apache warrior steps forward, his voice low as thunder. "I'm keeping her anyway." The town erupts in shock. A bride no one wanted, a warrior everyone feared, and land worth fighting for. As whispers turn to jeers, the sheriff eyes his rifle. The cattle baron plots revenge, and the woman clutches her latura, dowry tied to 10 acres of river gold. Dust swirls, hooves, thunder. Hymns and war cries rise together. Can one wrong bride and one feared warrior turn humiliation into a home, or will greed and prejudice tear them apart before love ever has a chance? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Trinidad's Main Street as the stagecoach rattled to a stop, stirring dust that settled on the eager faces of townspeople gathered at the depot. Thomas McGrath adjusted his string tie and smoothed back his hair, practicing the gentleman's smile he'd been rehearsing for weeks. His Boston bride would appreciate such refinement, he figured. The stage driver secured the reins and climbed down from his perch. "Mail and passengers for Trinidad," he called out, his voice carrying across the square where merchants and ranch hands had paused their business to witness the arrival. Thomas stepped forward, chest puffed out in his Sunday best coat. The door creaked open and a small hand emerged, followed by a figure that made him freeze mid-stride. Instead of the fair-haired Boston lady he'd been promised, a young woman with olive skin and dark eyes peered out from beneath a modest veil. She clutched a worn carpet bag close, her other hand wrapped around a wooden rosary. "That can't be right," Thomas muttered, his face flushing red. There must be another passenger. But the stage driver was already helping the woman down, treating her with careful courtesy. "Just the one today, Mr. McGraw. This here's Miss Elena Ruiz." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. "She's Mexican, or maybe Indian," someone stage whispered. Poor Thomas, getting swindled like that. Elena's cheeks burned as she stood alone in the street, but she kept her chin up. Years of mission school discipline evident in her straight spine. The preacher, Reverend Wells, frowned deeply from the edge of the crowd, shaking his head at what he clearly saw as an unfortunate situation. Thomas's composure shattered. "This is outrageous," he shouted, causing Elena to flinch. "I paid good money to that matchmaker for a proper Boston lady. Not some he bid off the cruel word, but his meaning was clear enough." "Sir, I have my papers," Elena said softly, reaching into her bag. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "The agency assured me everything was in order." "Order?" Thomas laughed harshly. "Nothing about this is in order. Your damaged goods, false advertising, plain and simple." He turned to the crowd, playing to their sympathies. "Can you believe this? They think they can pass off just anyone enough." The single word, deep as thunder, silenced the square. The crowd parted as a massive figure stepped forward, an Apache warrior whose height and breadth seemed to fill the space between buildings. His buckskins were clean, his long hair tied back neatly. But there was no mistaking the power in his measured movements. Some of the townsfolk drew back. Others reached for weapons that weren't there, old fears dying hard. But the warrior, known as Nantain, paid them no mind. His dark eyes were fixed on Elena, seeing past her embarrassment to something deeper, a quiet strength that matched his own. "They sent the wrong bride," Nantain said, his English clear and deliberate. I'm keeping her anyway." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thomas's face went from red to purple. "Now see here, you can't just butt." Nantan was already moving, his steps purposeful but gentle as he approached Alina. He extended his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace and protection both. "I'm called Nantan," he said, his voice softening. "My people know me as Giant, but you need not fear my size." Alina looked up at him, really looked, and found kindness in his eyes that belied his fearsome reputation. His hand remained steady. Waiting for her choice, "I am Alina Ruiz," she replied, her voice growing stronger. She placed her small hand in his large one, feeling calluses earned from years of honest work. "And I am not afraid." The touch seemed to seal something between them, a promise unspoken but real as the ground beneath their feet. Nantan positioned himself slightly in front of her, shielding her from the hostile stares without claiming ownership. "This is madness," Thomas sputtered. "She was meant for me. I have a contract with a woman who is not here," Nantan pointed out calmly. "This one came seeking a home. She will find it with me." Alina felt tears threatening but blinked them back. Years of being seen as wrong, too Mexican for some, too Apache for others, too Catholic for many, had taught her to expect rejection. But here was acceptance, offered freely and without condition. "The agency will hear about this," Thomas threatened. But his words seemed to lose power in the face of Nantan's quiet certainty. "My uncle won't stand for such theft." "There is no theft in freely given choice," Nantan replied. He turned to Alina, his expression softening further. "My home is simple, but it is clean and warm. There is a garden plot that wants tending, and children at the mission who need teaching. Will you share these things with me?" Alina felt something bloom in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or the first flutter of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the now silent square. "I will share these things with you." A few of the townswomen were dabbing at their eyes, moved despite themselves by the unexpected romance unfolding before them. Even some of the men shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the honor in Nantan's actions, even if they'd never admit it. Aloud, the stage driver, who'd watched it all with the philosophical air of one who'd seen many strange things on frontier roads, cleared his throat. "Well then, seems the lady's made her choice. Might want to make it official-like, though. Reverend's right there and all." Reverend Wells stepped forward, tugging at his collar. "Now, I'm not entirely sure about the propriety of this situation. I have papers from the mission," Alina offered quietly, "and my baptismal record. I was raised in the faith, Reverend." The preacher hesitated, looking between Alina's hopeful face and Nantan's steady gaze. Something in their bearing, perhaps the way they stood together, neither claiming dominance but both showing strength, seemed to decide him. "Well," he said slowly, "the Lord does work in mysterious ways, and it would be better to have things properly blessed than to leave room for gossip." Thomas made one last spluttering protest, but it was lost in the sudden bustle as the crowd, sensing the possibility of a wedding, began to arrange themselves accordingly. Several women hurried forward to straighten Alina's travel musk dress and arrange her veil more properly. Nantan remained close, his presence both anchor and shield. When Alina glanced up at him questioningly, he smiled, a small expression, but one that transformed his entire face. "Among my people," he said softly, "we say that the strongest unions are forged in moments of crisis when hearts recognize their match despite all obstacles." Alina's answering smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "My grandmother used to say something similar about God's hand guiding us to where we truly belong." The square that had moments ago hummed with judgment now buzzed with the excitement of unexpected celebration. As Reverend Wells opened his prayer book, Alina felt Nantan's strong hand steady beneath hers, and knew with sudden certainty that she had found not just safety, but home. The sudden announcement of marriage sent ripples through the crowd. Some townsfolk burst into nervous laughter, while others jeered openly. A group of ranch hands elbowed each other, making crude jokes behind their hands. Sheriff Harlan Boone pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the afternoon sun. "Now hold on just a minute," he drawled, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "We can't have an Apache taking a white man's bride. That ain't proper." His eyes narrowed as he studied Alina, although, looking at her, maybe she ain't so white after all. Alina's cheeks burned at the sheriff's words. She clutched her rosary tighter, the wooden beads pressing into her palm. Thomas McGraw wheeled around, his face twisted with rage. "This is robbery. That matchmaker will hear from my lawyers." He stormed off toward the telegraph office boots, kicking up dust, shouting over his shoulder, "You'll all see, this ain't the end of it." The crowd's attention swung back to Alina and Nantan. Elena's voice trembled as she looked up at the giant warrior. "Sir, I cannot marry without proper consent. It isn't right." Her mission training showed in every careful word. The agency must approve any change. Nantan's response surprised everyone. Instead of arguing, he lowered himself to one knee before her, bringing his great height level with hers. From beneath his buckskin shirt, he drew out a silver ring on a leather cord. The metal caught the light, showing delicate patterns worked into its surface. "This belonged to my first promised one," he said quietly, his deep voice carrying despite its softness. "She died at Sand Creek with our families. I have kept it safe, waiting for one with a spirit strong enough to wear it." His dark eyes met Elena's directly. "I offer you honest choice, my protection as husband, or watch you face the street alone. Which do you prefer?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the hostile faces around them. Her fingers worked the rosary beads faster. She glanced toward the stage, but the driver was already loading new passengers. There would be no going back. Finally, she nodded, so faintly it was barely visible. The scandal of refusing now, in front of everyone, would follow her forever. At least Nantan had shown her kindness. Reverend Wells cleared his throat. "If this is truly happening, it must be done proper-like, in the church. Can't have folks saying, 'We allowed any impropriety.'" He mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Though I must say, this is highly irregular." "Better irregular than lawless," Sheriff Boone growled. "Get them hitched quick before trouble starts." The small clapboard church filled quickly with curious onlookers. They sat stiff-backed in the pews, whispering behind their hands as Alina and Nantan stood before the altar. The afternoon sun streamed through simple glass windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Elena's hand shook as she faced Nantan. Her travel-worn dress suddenly felt inadequate for a wedding, even one as unusual as this. The preacher opened his Bible, looking uncomfortable but determined to maintain order. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing in the hushed church. Nantan's calm presence steadied Alina as they exchanged vows. His voice never wavered, speaking each promise with clear conviction. When he slipped the silver ring onto her finger, his gentle touch belied his massive strength. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Wells declared. Just as the church door burst open, Thomas McGrath stood in the doorway, red-faced and breathing hard. "She owns nothing," he shouted. "No property, no rights, nothing. She's just a vagrant taking advantage. No." Elena's voice cut through his tirade, stronger than before. She reached into her carpet bag with trembling fingers and withdrew a sealed envelope. "The matchmaker gave me this. She said it was my dowry." The church fell silent as Alina broke the seal and unfolded a legal document. Her voice gained strength. As she read, in consideration of marriage contract and settlement, the bearer is granted deed to 10 acres of land along the Trinidad River, with all associated water rights, and a gasp went through the congregation. Water rights along the river were more precious than gold in the drought-prone territory. Several ranchers leaned forward, suddenly more interested in the dusty Mexican girl they'd dismissed moments before. "Let me see that." Thomas lunged forward, but Nantan stepped smoothly between them. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, snatching the paper from Elena's hands. His eyes widened as he read. "It's legal," he admitted grudgingly. "Signed and notarized proper in Boston." He looked at Elena with new calculation in his eyes. "Seems the lady brings more to this marriage than we thought." Elena stood straighter, drawing strength from Nantan's solid presence beside her. The silver ring caught the light on her finger, a symbol not just of marriage now, but of an unexpected new beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Trinidad streets as Elena and Nantan walked away from the church. The townsfolk's whispers followed them, carried on the cooling breeze. Elena clutched her carpetbag close, her new silver ring catching the fading light. Her legs trembled with each step, the day's events weighing heavy on her shoulders. Nantan led the way without speaking, his broad shoulders blocking the worst of the wind that had begun to sweep down from the mountains. They followed a narrow trail that wound along the river's edge, where cottonwoods swayed and rustled. The water gurgled over rocks, sound both soothing and strange to Elena's ears after the long stagecoach journey. After 20 minutes of walking, a weathered-lined shack came into view, tucked against a bend in the river. The rough-hewn logs showed signs of age, and the tin roof had patches of rust. It wasn't much, nothing like the proper home Elena had imagined when answering the marriage advertisement, but it stood solid against the darkening sky. "Hunters used this place," Nantan explained, his deep voice gentle. "It will shelter us until better arrangements can be made." He pushed open the creaking door, stepping back to let Elena enter first. Inside, the cabin was simple and spare. A narrow bed with a thin mattress stood against one wall. A pot-bellied stove squatted in the corner, its pipe disappearing through the roof. The floorboards groaned under their feet, and Elena could see slivers of evening light between the wall. Logs where the chinking had fallen away. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't the respectable rancher's home she'd been promised. This wasn't even the mission where she'd grown up. This was, Elena sank onto a rough-hewn chair, her shoulders shaking as tears began to fall. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to muffle her sobs. All her hopes for a proper marriage, all her careful preparations and prayers, had led her here to a drafty shack with a stranger. Nantan moved quietly around the small space, giving her privacy in her grief. The scratch of a match broke the silence as he lit a lamp, then knelt to build a fire in the stove. Soon the crack and pop of burning wood filled the cabin, pushing back the evening chill. "You should eat," he said, after a while, offering her a piece of dried venison from his bag. The journey was long. Elena accepted the food with trembling fingers, but couldn't bring herself to eat yet. She watched as Nantan gathered his blanket and moved toward the door. Where are you going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will sleep outside," he answered simply. "The cabin bed is yours. I won't share it without your trust." He ducked through the doorway, his massive frame making the entrance seem small. Elena sat in the lamplight, listening to the sounds of Nantan settling on the porch. The venison remained untouched in her lap as she tried to make sense of this strange man who had claimed her as his bride, yet now gave her space and safety. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she curled up on the bed, still fully dressed. Her rosary-clutched tight dawn broke clear and cold over the river. Elena woke to the steady rhythm of an axe-splitting wood. She wrapped her shawl tight and moved to the window, watching as Nantan worked. his powerful muscles flexed with each swing, the axe rising and falling in a smooth arc. His face showed intense concentration. Yet there was a grace to his movements that seemed almost like a dance. When he finished, Nantan set the axe aside and moved to where his horse grazed nearby. Lena found herself drawn to the door, watching as he brushed the animal's coat with slow, gentle strokes. He spoke softly in Apache to the horse, his voice carrying the same tender tone she remembered from the mission priests. Blessing small children. The morning sun climbed higher as Nantan finished tending to his horse. Then, to Elena's surprise, he knelt in the grass, facing east. His lips moved in silent prayer, his hands raised briefly to the brightening sky. There was such peace in his expression, such quiet devotion, that Elena felt her own heart calm. Little as the day warmed, Elena ventured out to the water's edge. The river chattered over stones, clear and cool. She filled the bucket Nantan had left by the door, noting how he had already stacked the fresh-cut wood neatly against the cabin wall. Everything about his actions spoke of care and consideration. The evening settled soft around them, painted in shades of purple and gold. Elena had spent the day putting the cabin in what order she could, finding comfort in small tasks. When Nantan returned from checking his horse one last time, she had managed to heat some coffee over the stove. He accepted the tin cup with a nod of thanks, then settled on the porch steps. After a moment's hesitation, Elena sat too, leaving space between them. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You are free," Nantan said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "The choice to stay or go is yours. But while you are here, I will protect you." He turned to look at her, his face serious. "This I swear." Elena wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. The silver ring glinted in the last light of day. She was still afraid, still uncertain of her future. But something had shifted inside her. Where yesterday she had felt trapped, today she felt guarded. Protected, but not imprisoned. She didn't answer Nantan's words, but she didn't move away either. They sat in companionable silence as night settled over the river bend, each lost in their own thoughts, while crickets began their evening song in the tall grass. Days passed. Slowly by the river bend, Elena woke early one morning, the sun barely peeking over the eastern hills. She wrapped her shawl tight against the dawn chill and stepped outside. Nantan had already left to check his trap lines, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The river called to her, its gentle song drawing her down the bank. Elena walked slowly, taking in the land around her for the first time since her arrival. Tall cottonwoods lined the water's edge, their leaves dancing in the morning breeze. Their broad branches would offer welcome shade in the summer heat. She realized, just like the trees at the mission where she'd grown up, kneeling by the water's edge. Elena scooped up a handful of soil. It crumbled rich and dark between her fingers, still damp with morning dew. This wasn't the harsh, rocky ground she'd expected. This was good earth, the kind that could nurture corn, beans, and squash. The kind her Mexican mother had taught her to read before the fever took her. Garden soil, she whispered to herself, hope stirring in her chest. With water so close, the thunder of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Elena stood quickly, brushing dirt from her skirts as 3 riders approached. She recognized the deputy's badge glinting in the morning sun, but the hard looks on their faces made her step back toward the cabin. "Mrs., whatever you're calling yourself now," the deputy called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Got a message for you and that Apache you're living with." Elena lifted her chin, trying to still her trembling hands. "I am Mrs. Nanton," she said, quietly but firmly. The deputy spat in the dust. "Mikraw's uncle wants you to know that deed of yours ain't worth the paper it's written on." This is cattle land. Always has been. He's got papers going back 20 years. The matchmaker gave me legal rights. Alina protested, but her voice wavered. Legal? One of the other riders laughed harshly. Ain't nothing legal about an Indian squatting on white man's property. You'd do well to clear out before there's trouble. They wheeled their horses around and rode off, leaving Alina standing, alone by the river. Fear closed her throat, making it hard to breathe. She hurried back to the cabin, her safe haven in this strange new world. Inside, Elena's hands shook as she lit the small candle she'd brought from the mission. Kneeling before it, she pulled out her rosary and began to pray aloud in Spanish, the familiar words bringing comfort. Dios te salve, Maria, Lena, heirs de gracia. She didn't hear Nantan return. But suddenly he was there, his quiet presence, filling the doorway. He listened without interrupting as she finished her prayers, her voice growing stronger with each word. When she finally fell silent, he spoke softly. Fear is like winter frost. It cannot last against a strong heart. Alina wiped her eyes. The deputy came. They say the land isn't really mine. Nantan nodded slowly. Mikra's uncle is known for such claims. But we will not leave. He held out his hand to help her up. Come, I will teach you things you need to know. Over the next hours, Nantan showed Alina how to set simple rabbit traps, his large hands gentle. As they demonstrated the careful knots, he taught her the most efficient way to carry water from the river, how to balance the bucket against her hip to save strength. Alina listened carefully, grateful for knowledge that would help her survive. That evening, Alina opened her small bag of dried herbs, her mother's legacy. The familiar scents of oregano and sage filled the cabin as she prepared a thick stew, adding wild onions Nantan had gathered. The simple meal seemed to soften the rough edges of their shelter, making it feel more like a true home. As they ate, Alina studied Nantan's face in the lamplight. I know so little about you, she said hesitantly. Your people, my people, have lived in these hills since before the Spanish came, he replied. We know every spring, every trail. His eyes grew distant. Many are gone now, but some remain, keeping the old ways. Before Alina could respond, urgent voices called from outside. Nantan rose quickly, Alina following close behind. In the gathering dusk, 2 Apache women stood holding a small boy between them. The child's face was flushed. With fever, his breathing labored. My sister's son, one woman explained in halting English. Very sick. We heard you no medicines. Lena's heart went out to the suffering child. Bring him inside, she said, already moving to stoke the fire. As they laid the boy on her bed, she felt his burning forehead and recognized the same fever that had swept through the mission last winter, working quickly. Alina brewed a strong tea from willow bark, adding honey to make it more palatable. She bathed the child's face with cool cloths while the bitter medicine did its work. Through the long night, she sang soft hymns learned at the mission. Watching as the boy's breathing gradually eased, by morning the fever had broken. The women's faces shone with relief as the child took his first clear breaths. They pressed Elena's hands in gratitude, speaking rapid Apache that she couldn't understand. But their meaning was clear in their eyes and gentle touches. They returned the next day with gifts, fresh cornmeal, ground by hand, strips of smoked venison, warm blankets woven in bright patterns. Other women came too, bringing children with coughs or elderly relatives with aching joints. Alina treated them all, blending her mission training with the herbal knowledge passed down from her mother. Each visitor left something in return: food, materials for the cabin, or simply stories. Shared over cups of pine needle tea, Alina began to learn Apache words, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds while her patients smiled encouragingly. The cabin that had seemed so lonely now hummed with life and purpose. One night, after a long day of treating a grandmother's arthritis, Alina sat with Nantan on the porch steps. Stars scattered across the sky like silver beads, and the river sang its endless song. "I must confess something," Alina said softly. "When you claimed me at the stage, stop, I was afraid. I thought perhaps you saw me as property to be owned, like the cattle the ranchers fight over." Nantan was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. A woman is not a possession. She is a light. He gestured to the stars above. "Like those lights that guide us home in darkness, you bring healing to my people. That is worth more than any cattle." Alina felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude now, not fear. Here, in this simple cabin by the river, she had found something she'd never expected. Not just shelter, but purpose. Not just protection, but belonging. The night wrapped around them like a blanket as they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The bitter wind that had greeted Elena's arrival had softened to a gentle breeze, carrying the promise of spring and new beginnings. A week passed like water flowing in the river, each day bringing subtle changes to the small cabin by the bend. The morning sun found Alina sweeping the wooden floor, humming softly as she worked. The cabin had transformed. Dried herbs hung from rafters, colorful blankets brightened the walls, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Outside, the steady rhythm of Nantan's carving tools blended with children's laughter. He sat on a stump, strong hands carefully shaping another wooden stool. 5 local children watched in fascination as curls of pine dropped at his feet. Their mothers gathered nearby, grinding corn and sharing stories in mixed Apache and broken English. Miss Alina called Little Bird, a bright-eyed girl of 7. "Teach us another song." Alina smiled, setting aside her broom. The children gathered around her like eager sparrows, their faces upturned. She began the gentle melody her mother had taught her long ago. Alabado CL Santissimo, Sacramento del Altar. The sweet notes drifted across the yard. One by one, the children joined in, their young voices stumbling over the Spanish words, but catching the spirit of praise. Elena's heart swelled as she watched them sway to the rhythm. Here, no one questioned if Mexican hymns belonged on Apache land. Nantan paused in his carving, watching Alina lead the singing. Her face glowed with joy, so different from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stage. His hands resumed their work, crafting another stool for the growing number of visitors who gathered at their door. But peace at the river bend couldn't change hearts in town. When Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, Alina dressed in her best skirt and shawl, determined to attend Mass. She hadn't missed Sunday worship since leaving the mission, and her faith felt more precious now than ever. "I will ride with you," Nantan said simply, seeing her intention. Alina touched his arm gratefully. "Thank you, but I must go alone. This is between me and God." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I will wait in town." The small church stood bright white against the morning sky, its bell calling the faithful to worship. Alina climbed the steps, clutching her prayer book. As she reached for the door, 2 women in fine dresses drew back, gathering their skirts as if her presence might soil them inside. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and incense wrapped around her. Alina dipped her fingers in the holy water, making the sign of the cross. But when she moved toward an empty pew, the woman seated there quickly shifted to block the space. Alina tried another row, her cheeks burning as whispers followed her movement. Again and again, she met closed ranks and turned shoulders. Finally, she slipped into the last pew, alone in the corner shadows. The deacon's voice cut through her prayers. Mrs. Nantan's whisper carried clear disapproval. "Perhaps you should. Consider the appropriateness of your presence here. These good Christians shouldn't have to share pews with someone who has tainted herself." The words struck like physical blows. Alina rose, tears blurring her vision as she fled the church. She barely noticed the cool morning air or the curious stares of passers-by. Her feet carried her blindly down the street until a gentle hand caught. Her arm. Nantan stood there, solid as a mountain. He had been waiting, as promised. One look at her face told him everything. "If their God rejects you," he said firmly, "then he is not God." Alina wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. "Their rejection isn't God's rejection. Christ welcomed everyone, the poor, the outcast, the stranger. That's what I believe. That's what my mother taught me." Nantan was quiet for a long moment. Alina knew he carried deep scars from encounters with missionaries who had tried to strip away Apache ways. Yet he listened without judgment as she spoke of her faith. "Your belief makes you strong," he said finally. "Like the river, it finds its way past stones that try to block it." They rode home in comfortable silence, the morning's pain gradually easing under the vast blue sky. That evening, as sunset painted the river gold, Alina walked to the bank. The water's song always soothed her spirit. Almost without thinking, she began to sing. Not a formal hymn this time, but a gentle praise. Song her mother had crooned over her cradle. "Dulce Jesus mio, mi nino adorado," a deep voice joined hers, surprising her. Nantan stood nearby, his rich baritone weaving through her melody. Though he didn't know the words, he followed the tune perfectly, adding harmony that made her heart skip. They sang together as darkness gathered, their voices rising and falling like the river's flow. Apache melody threaded through Spanish verse, creating something new and beautiful. Neither noticed the settler walking his horse along the far bank until he spoke. "Well, I'll be." The man shook his head in wonder. "Never thought to hear Apache and Spanish hymn together. Sounds right pretty, too." Alina and Nantan shared a glance, and suddenly she understood. This marriage, begun in desperation at the stage stop, had become something chosen, something true. Their different ways of prayer, like their different songs, didn't clash but harmonized. The settler tipped his hat and rode on, leaving them in the gathering dusk. But the echo of their shared song lingered, sweeter than any formal wedding music. Could have been, here by the river that belonged to no one and everyone, they had found their own way of worship, their own kind of love. Nantan offered his hand to help Alina up the bank. Together they walked back to their cabin, where lamplight glowed in welcome and the evening star blessed. Their home with silver light. Spring arrived at the river bend with gentle warmth and promises of new beginnings. The morning sun painted the cabin's weathered walls with gold as Alina stood at the edge of their small plot, breathing in the rich scent of freshly turned earth. Nantan had worked for days to prepare the soil, his powerful arms guiding the plow through winter-hardened ground. "The earth is ready," he said, placing a handful of dark soil in Alina's palm. "Now we plant our future." Alina's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the cloth bag of bean seeds she'd traded for at the general store. These were her mother's favorite variety, frijoles negros that would climb tall poles and produce abundantly. Beside her lay another bag of blue corn, kernels, a gift from the Apache women who had become her friends. "Show me how," she said to Nantan, who smiled and knelt beside her. His large hands demonstrated the proper depth for each seed, showing her how to mound the soil just so. "The old ones say to plant with prayer," he explained. "Each seed carries hope." Together they worked down the rows, Alina dropping seeds while Nantan followed with the hoe. The spring breeze carried their quiet conversation mixed with occasional laughter when Alina stumbled or Nantan teased her about her crooked rows. Their shoulders brushed as they worked, comfortable now in each other's space. By midday, clouds gathered overhead, promising the rain their plantings needed. Alina looked up at their cabin's roof, noting the spots where winter had loosened the shakes. "We should fix that before the storm comes." Nantan nodded, already gathering tools. Soon they were both atop the low roof, Alina handing him replacement shakes while he hammered them secure. When she slipped on the slope, his quick hand caught her, steadying her with gentle strength. Their eyes met, and suddenly they were both laughing, the sound echoing across the river bend like music. "I never thought I'd be fixing roofs," Alina admitted, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "At the mission, they said a lady shouldn't climb higher than her doorstep. And what do you think now?" Nantan asked, his dark eyes twinkling. "I think," she replied with a grin, "that I like the view from up here." The roof repair finished just as the first fat drops began to fall. Inside their snug cabin, Alina stirred a large pot of celebratory stew, adding wild onions and herbs she'd gathered along the riverbank. The rich aroma filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of rain on dust. "We should share our blessing," she said thoughtfully. "Invite others to celebrate the planting." Nantan agreed, and as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, their yard filled with guests. 3 Apache mothers arrived with their children, bringing fresh-baked flatbread and wild honey, to Elena's joy. 2 white women from neighboring homesteads also came. Sarah Miller and Beth Cooper had gradually overcome their initial fears. Drawn by Elena's healing skills and gentle ways, the children played while the adults gathered around the cooking fire. Alina served her stew in tin cups, its savory warmth matching the warmth of friendship in the air. Languages mixed freely as stories were shared, Sarah describing her journey west in a wagon train, Walking Flower telling of her grandmother's wisdom about healing plants, Beth admitting her initial prejudices had been wrong. The children's laughter rang out as they chased each other through the new garden rows. M's rapido. Little Carlos called to his playmates, while Sarah's daughter Katie tried out Apache words she'd learned. "Ahi, thank you," she called when Alina handed her a piece of cornbread. As twilight painted the sky in purple and gold, Alina looked around at the circle of faces lit by firelight. Here was everything she'd dreamed of but never dared hope for, a home filled with love, friendship that crossed boundaries, children who saw no barriers between hearts. She turned to Nantan, who sat beside her, steady and strong. "Perhaps this was no accident," she whispered. "Perhaps God's hand guided that stagecoach, bringing me here for a purpose." Nantan's fingers found hers in the gathering dusk. He said, softly, "My beloved." The Apache words fell like a blessing on her heart, but peace shattered like glass at the sudden thunder of hoofbeats. Horses and riders materialized from the darkness, Mikra's uncle leading a group of hard-faced men. Their arrival sent children scurrying to their mothers' sides while conversation died into wary silence. "Well, ain't this touching?" Mikra's uncle sneered, his voice cutting through the peaceful evening. "A regular savage feast you got here." His eyes raked across the gathering, lingering with particular distaste on the white women seated among the Apache mothers. Nantan rose slowly to his full height, his stance protective but calm. "This is our land," he said clearly. "These are our guests. Your land." Mikra's uncle spat on the ground. "This bend belongs to my cattle. Always has. That fake deed ain't worth the paper it's written on." Alina stood beside her husband, fear warring with determination in her heart. "The matchmaker's letter is legal," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "We've planted crops, made improvements." The cattle baron's laugh was ugly. "Improvements? A few corn stalks and some half-breed brats running wild don't make this your property." He turned his horse, the animal dancing nervously under his brutal hand. "We'll be back with the sheriff. He knows whose side his bread is buttered on." The riders wheeled their horses, kicking up dust as they galloped away. Their hoofbeats faded into darkness, but the fear they'd brought remained. Hanging heavy in the once joyful air, the gathering broke up quickly, mothers hurrying their children home while throwing anxious glances over their shoulders. Sarah and Beth lingered just long enough to squeeze Elena's hand in silent support before they too disappeared into the night. Elena stood motionless, staring at the abandoned cups of stew, the scattered remnants of their celebration. All there, careful planting all their hopes for the future. Suddenly seemed as fragile as morning mist on the river. Nantan's arms slipped around her shoulders, solid and warm. But even his strength couldn't completely banish the chill that had settled in. Her heart, the harmony they'd built, like the seeds they'd planted that morning, would need more than prayer to survive the storm gathering on their horizon. Dawn broke over the river bend, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Elena stood at the cabin door, watching Nantan mount his horse for the ride into town. Her heart felt heavy as lead. "Be careful," she whispered, pressing a small cloth-wrapped package of cornbread into his hand. "The sheriff, he's not a fair man." Nantan's face remained calm, though his eyes held worry. "I will speak with respect," he promised. Sometimes words can build bridges where fists only break them. Elena watched until horse and rider disappeared into the morning mist. Then she turned to the newly planted fields, determined to keep her hands busy while her mind fretted. The tender shoots needed water, and she lost herself in the rhythm of carrying buckets from the river. Hours crawled by like wounded things. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning cool. Elena's arms ached from her work, but she welcomed the distraction. Every few minutes, her eyes strayed to the road, hoping to see Nantan returning. Instead, the thunder of hooves announced a different arrival. Her heart stopped at the sight of Mikraw's uncle leading a group of ranch hands toward their property. They rode straight through the new fence Nantan had built, splintering the rails. "No," Elena cried out, running toward them. "Please, you have no right." Mikraw's uncle sneered down at her. "Got every right, girl. Sheriff says so." He turned to his men. "Tear it all down, drive the cattle through. Show these squatters what's what." The men dismounted, laughing as they ripped up fence posts and tossed them aside. Elena grabbed one post, trying to stop them, but a burly ranch hand shoved her roughly. She fell hard, tasting dirt and blood where she bit her lip. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," the man growled. Helpless tears burned Elena's eyes as she watched them drive a herd of cattle through their carefully planted fields. The animals' heavy hooves trampled the tender seedlings, destroying in minutes what she and Nantan had worked days to create. "That'll teach you to steal white men's water rights," Mikraw's uncle called out as they finished their destruction. "Next time, we won't be so gentle." The sun was setting when Nantan finally appeared on the road. Elena ran to him, crying out. At the sight of his bruised face and torn shirt, he practically fell from his saddle, exhaustion evident in every movement. "The sheriff," he said quietly, letting her help him to the cabin. "He sides with McGrath. Says the matchmaker's letter looks suspicious." His voice turned bitter. "They kept me in jail all day, saying I was disturbing the peace." "Your poor face," Elena murmured, settling him in their single chair. She hurried to heat water, gathering the herbs she used for healing. "Did they beat you?" Some deputies thought to teach the Apache his place. Nantan's hands clenched. "I wanted to fight back. My father's spirit called for warriors' justice." He looked up at Elena, his eyes dark with pain. "But I remembered your words about turning the other cheek. I thought of you, waiting here. Violence would only bring more trouble." Elena's heart swelled as she gently cleaned his cuts with a damp cloth. "You chose mercy," she whispered, "even when they showed none." "I chose you," he replied simply, "working by lamplight." Alina applied healing salve to his bruises and wrapped his ribs where Deputy's boots had left their mark. Her touch was tender, each movement a whispered thank you for his restraint. They destroyed everything, she told him, voice breaking. The fence, our crops. Mikraw's uncle led them himself. Nantan's large hand found hers in the dim light, squeezing. Gently, seeds can be replanted, he said. Fences rebuilt. But trust, once broken by violence, dies like grass in drought. Alina helped him to their bed, knowing he needed rest. As she turned to go, his grip tightened on her fingers. Stay, he murmured, already half asleep. Wife. The word sent warmth spreading through her chest. Alina settled beside him, watching. His battered face relaxed in sleep. His hand remained wrapped around hers, as if anchoring them both against the storm of hatred trying to tear them apart. In the quiet darkness, Lena faced the truth that had been growing in her heart. This marriage, arranged in desperation and sealed by a stranger's kindness, had become more precious than any romantic dream. Love had taken root like the stubborn wildflowers that grew along the river, not planted by choice, but springing up through the soil of shared struggles and gentle sacrifices. She touched Nantan's bruised cheek with her free hand. Remembering how he had claimed her that first day, protecting her from humiliation. Now he had endured beating and imprisonment, choosing peace over pride for her sake. Yet Mikraw's uncle's threats hung over them like storm clouds. He would return, determined, to prove her dowry false and drive them from the land. Nantan stirred in his sleep, mumbling something in Apache. Alina squeezed his hand, silently promising that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their love might not have been born of choice, but it had been forged in sacrifice, and that, she was beginning to understand, made it stronger than any romance. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon as Alina fastened her bonnet with trembling fingers. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, eyes bright with purpose, jaw set firm despite her fear. Nantan watched from their cabin door as she saddled her mare. "You do not have to go alone," he said softly. "Yes, I do." Alina adjusted her skirts on the saddle. "The town fears you now, but me." She managed a small smile. "I am just a woman. Perhaps that will be my strength today." The morning air was cool as Alina rode toward Trinidad, her bonnet shading her face from the rising sun. Her mother's rosary hung beneath her collar, each bead a reminder of the prayers that had carried her through darker days than this. The streets were beginning to stir as she tied our horse outside the matchmaker's office. A few early risers paused their morning errands to stare, whispering behind raised hands. Alina lifted her chin and pushed open the door, its bell chiming her arrival. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through grimy windows. The clerk, an aging man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his ledger. His eyes widened with recognition. Mrs., he stammered, clearly uncertain how to address her. "Mrs. Nantan," Alina said firmly, though the name still felt new on her tongue. "I need proof of my dowry lands. The original documents, if you please." The clerk fidgeted with his pen. "That's quite irregular, madame. Those records are confidential, as is my right to them." Alina planted both hands on his desk, leaning forward. "Men threaten my home, destroy my crops, jail my husband. I will not leave without proof of what is mine." Something in her voice, perhaps the steel beneath its softness, made the clerk rise. He shuffled to a filing cabinet, muttering to himself as he searched through yellowed papers. Here, he finally extracted a leather folder. "But I must warn you, Mrs. Nantan, men of wealth have ways of turning courts to their favor. Papers alone may not protect you." Alina opened the folder with reverent care. There it was, her name in flowing script, the seal still intact. 10 acres along the river bend, promised as her dowry. Her fingers traced the official signatures, memorizing every detail. "I will need copies," she said, "case anything happens." To the original, the clerk hesitated, then nodded. "It will take some time to transcribe. I will wait." The morning crept toward noon as the clerk carefully copied every word. Alina sat straight-backed in a hard wooden chair, ignoring the curious faces that peered through the office window. Finally, documents secured in her satchel, Alina stepped back into the street. The town had fully awakened now, sidewalks busy. With morning trade, she walked with measured steps, feeling the weight of every stare. "Savages, woman," someone hissed as she passed. "Ain't natural," muttered another. Alina clutched her satchel tighter, each insult striking like a physical blow. Yet she kept walking, back straight, eyes forward, until she reached the white-painted church at the end of the street. Inside, the sanctuary was cool and dim. Lena's footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as she made her way to the front pew. She knelt, letting the familiar peace of the place wash over her. "I did not expect to see you here again." The preacher's voice startled her. He stood in the shadow of the pulpit, Bible in hand. "This is God's house," Alina said simply. "All are welcome in His presence." Yes, the preacher's face softened. "I confess, Mrs. Nantan, I doubted you at first. Thought perhaps your faith was mere show, like some I've known." He stepped closer. "But I've watched you these weeks, seen how you tend to sick, teach the children, endure scorn with grace. Your faith shines true." Tears pricked Alina's eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. Your words give me courage." "Truth is its own courage," he replied. "And love. Real love, born of sacrifice and service. That's God's truth made flesh." Alina touched her satchel, feeling the precious papers within. "I have proof now, Kay, of my rights to the land." The preacher nodded gravely. "Guard it well. But remember, your strongest proof is the life you live, the love you show." He hesitated. "Would you like to pray together?" They knelt side by side, the preacher's weathered voice joining Alina's soft Spanish whispers. When she rose, her heart felt lighter despite the battle still ahead. The sun was setting as Alina finally rode home, painting the river bend in shades of gold. Nantan stood waiting, his massive frame outlined against the dying light. She practically fell into his arms, exhausted but triumphant. "Look," she said, pulling out the documents. "Proof that cannot be denied." They sat together at their rough table, the lamp casting a warm glow as Alina spread out the papers. Nantane's finger traced her name, careful, as if touching something sacred. "You rode into town alone," he said quietly. Faced their hatred without flinching. His dark eyes met hers. "You are braver than any warrior I have known." Alina blushed, ducking her head. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I remembered how you chose peace over pride. It gave me strength." Nantan smiled, reaching for the worn Bible they kept beside their bed. "Then let us give thanks for strength given and received." They sat close together, heads bent over the familiar pages. Alina's voice rose and fell, reading the ancient words of comfort. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Neither of them noticed the shadows moving outside their window, or heard the soft crunch of hooves in the darkness, while faith and love glowed warm within the cabin. Hatred gathered in the night, plotting its next strike. The lamplight flickered across the precious documents spread before them. Proof of their right to this land, this life they were building together. Elena's finger followed the lines of scripture, while Nantan's deep voice joined hers in prayer, both unaware that their peace was about to be shattered once again. Dark clouds rolled across the morning sky, turning day to twilight. Alina stood at the cabin window, watching lightning flicker in the distance. The air felt heavy, charged with more than just the coming storm. "Storm's moving fast," Nantan observed, securing the cabin's shutters. His movements were steady, but Alina noticed how his eyes kept scanning the horizon. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, drumming against the roof. Alina had just lit the lamp when she heard it. Hoofbeats, many of them approaching through the downpour. Her heart lurched. "Nantan," she whispered, but he was already moving, positioning himself between her and the door. The cabin door burst open with a crash. McCraw's uncle filled the doorframe, rain dripping from his hat brim, flanked by 4 hired men. Their boots tracked mud across Elena's clean floor. Well, McGraw's uncle drawled, his eyes cold as river stones. "Heard you been to town?" Girl, waving around some papers. Elena's fingers closed around the deed in her apron pocket. "Legal papers," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Proving our right to this land." The cattle baron's laugh was ugly. "Legal." A Mexican half-breed and an Apache savage. He pulled a crumpled paper from his vest. "I got something to show you too. Proof your precious deed's a forgery." "That's a lie," Nantan's deep voice rumbled. He took a step forward, massive frame tensed. One of the hired men drew his pistol. "Stay back, Indian." The matchmaker himself confirmed these papers. Alina protested, pulling out the deed. "God is my witness. This land was promised as my dowry." God, McGraw's uncle spat on the floor. "God ain't got nothing to do with it. This is cattle country, and you're stealing water rights that belong to honest men." He lunged for the deed. Nantan moved like lightning, shoving him back. The cabin erupted into chaos. 2 men grabbed Nantan's arms, while a third struck him hard across the face. Alina screamed as they dragged him toward the door, his boots leaving deep grooves in the dirt floor. "Stop, please." She clutched the deed to her chest, following them out into the rain. The storm had turned the yard to mud. Lightning cracked overhead as the men threw Nantan down. He tried to rise, but boots struck his ribs with sickening thuds. Rain mixed with blood on his face. Alina had never felt such terror or such rage. Without thinking, she threw herself across Nantan's body, shielding him with her own. "If you want to kill him," she shouted above the storm, "you'll have to kill me too." The brutal kicks stopped. Rain pounded down as Alina clung to her husband, feeling his labored breathing beneath her. She began to pray aloud, her Spanish words, carried away by the wind. "Jesus, mercy, Madre de Dios, please." One of the hired men stepped back, lowering his fists. "This ain't right, boss," he said roughly, beating a man in front of his woman. "I didn't sign up for this, coward." McGraw's uncle snarled. But Alina saw uncertainty flicker across the other men's faces. Her prayers grew louder, more desperate. Finally, McGraw's uncle grabbed her hair, yanking her face up to his. "Listen, good woman, you got 1 week. 1 week to clear out, or what happened today will seem gentle." He released her with a shove. "Land ain't worth dying for." "You're wrong," Alina gasped, still covering Nantan with her body. "Some things are worth any price." The cattle baron spat again and stomped to his horse. One by one, his men mounted up. The one who had refused to fight lingered last, touching his hat brim in a gesture that might have been respect before riding away. Alina stayed there, rain soaking her dress until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did she let herself feel the terror she had suppressed. Her whole body began to shake. "Nantan?" she whispered. "My love, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, dark with pain, but clear. "I hear you. Sure, we must get you inside." She tried to help him up, but he was too heavy. "Please, try to stand. I cannot lift you alone." Somehow, through determination and desperation, they made it back into the cabin. Elena's hands trembled as she peeled off Nantan's wet shirt, revealing ugly bruises already darkening his ribs. "Some are broken," she said, probing gently. "I need to bind them." She worked in silence, using strips torn from her petticoat to wrap his chest tight. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the lamp cast warm light on their faces. When she finished, Elena sank down beside him, suddenly exhausted. For the first time since arriving in Trinidad, she felt despair creep into her heart. They had proof of their rights, but what good was paper against brutal force? How could they stand against such hatred? Moving carefully, she lit a candle from the lamp. The small flame danced, throwing shadows on the wall. Elena closed her eyes. "Lord," she prayed softly, "show us a way. We are lost in darkness. Give us light to follow." She felt Nantan's large hand cover hers. Despite his injuries, his grip was strong and sure. "You are my way," he whispered hoarsely. "My light in darkness." Elena opened her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness that her breath caught. Here was a warrior, a man feared by many, looking at her as if she held all the strength in the world. "How can you say that?" she asked. "I've brought this trouble to your life." "No." He touched her cheek, brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You brought life to my trouble. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I have something to live for." The rain continued to drum on the roof, but its rhythm felt different now, less threatening, more like a reminder that storms pass, that water brings life as well as destruction. Elena leaned carefully against Nantan's shoulder, mindful of his injuries. Together they watched the candle flame dance, its light reflecting in their eyes. Outside, darkness gathered and thunder rolled. But inside their humble cabin, husband and wife held fast to each other and to hope, knowing that sometimes the greatest courage is simply refusing to be broken. Dawn crept through the cabin's weathered walls, finding Elena already awake. She hadn't slept much these past 3 days, not since the beating. Her eyes traced Nanton's face in the pale light, noting how the bruises had begun to fade from purple to yellow-green. The cabin floor creaked beneath her feet as she moved to stoke the fire. Every sound seemed louder now, as if the violence had left echoes in their small home. She stirred the pot of healing broth, adding sprigs of herbs her mother had taught her would fight fever, warboon, and sage. "Elena," Anton's voice was rough with sleep. "I am here," she said, hurrying to his side. "You're thirsty?" He nodded, and she helped him lift his head, bringing the cup to his lips. His strength was returning, but slowly. The broken ribs made every movement a battle. "You haven't slept," he observed, studying her face. "I sleep enough," she answered, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. She began to hum softly an old Spanish lullaby her mother once sang as she checked his bandages. "Teach me that song," Nantan said, his deep voice barely above a whisper. Elena smiled, singing the words clearly this time. When she finished, Nantan repeated them carefully, his Apache accent giving the Spanish a unique melody. "Now you teach me," she said, settling beside him. "How do I say love in Apache?" "Ayo anasachin," he replied. His large hand found hers. Squeezing gently, "Ayo anesachan," she echoed, "and hope." He watched her practice the word, pride warming his eyes. "You learn quickly." Elena reached for her worn Bible, opening to the passages that had given her strength these past days. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read aloud, her voice steady. "I shall not want." The morning passed this way, scripture and song. Apache words and Spanish endearments, broth and bitter medicine. Elena saw how Nantan fought to sit up straighter, to move without wincing. "The deed," he said suddenly, interrupting her reading. "You must take it to town." Elena's hands tightened on the Bible. I cannot leave you like this. You must. His eyes held hers, intense despite his weakness. Show them our truth. Sunday service, everyone will be there. They hate us, she whispered. They fear what they don't understand. Nantan touched her cheek. Show them who you are, who we are, together. Alina wanted to protest, but she saw the wisdom in his words. The deed felt heavy in her apron pocket, where she'd kept it safe since the attack. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Alina dressed. In her best dress, faded but clean, and pinned her hair neatly beneath her bonnet. Her hands trembled as she checked Nantan's bandages one last time. I have water and bread within reach, she fretted. If you need, go, he said firmly. I will be here when you return. The ride into town seemed longer than ever before. Alina's heart pounded harder with each hoofbeat. The church bells were already ringing when she reached Trinidad's dusty main street. People stared as she dismounted, some turning away, others whispering behind raised hands. The church steps had never looked so steep. Alina paused, touching the deed in her pocket and the rosary at her neck. Give me strength, she prayed silently. The wooden doors creaked as she entered. Conversations died. Heads turned. Alina felt the weight of every stare as she walked down the aisle, but she kept her chin high, just as Nantan had taught her. She chose a pew near the front, though the people around her shifted away. The service began, but Alina barely heard the hymns or prayers. She was gathering her courage, waiting for the right moment. Finally, just before the benediction, she stood. Reverend, she called out, her voice clearer than she'd expected. I ask permission to speak. The preacher paused, surprised. After a long moment, he nodded. Alina turned to face the congregation, pulling the deed from her pocket with steady hands. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the official seal. When I stepped off that stagecoach, she began, you all said God had sent the wrong bride. Her eyes swept across the faces before her, some hostile, some curious, a few kind. I stand here today to tell you he sent exactly the right one for his plan, not yours. Murmurs rose, but Alina continued, her voice growing stronger. This deed proves my right to the River Bend land. But it proves something more important, that God's ways are not our ways. His wisdom reaches beyond the barriers we build. She unfolded the paper, holding it high. This is legal proof of my dowry. But my true gift was finding love where others saw only differences. Finding strength where others saw only weakness. The preacher stepped forward, examining the deed. Carefully, the congregation held its breath. This document, he announced slowly, bears the territorial seal. It is legitimate. A ripple of whispers spread through the church. Alina saw faces changed out, turning to consideration, scorn softening to something like respect. My husband, she said, and now her voice shook with emotion. Lies wounded because some would rather destroy than accept God's plan. But we will not be driven away. Our love is as real as this deed. Our home is as legitimate as any other. She looked directly at Thomas McGraw's family pew. We ask only for what is rightfully ours, the chance to work our land in peace, to build a life. Together, silence filled the church. Then, from the back, a woman's voice called out, Amen. Others joined, scattered voices becoming a chorus. Alina saw the preacher's eyes grow moist as he raised his hands for the benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you, he intoned. May he make his face shine upon you, all of you, and give you peace. Elena's legs felt weak as she left the church, but her heart was lighter than it had been in days. To her amazement, several women nodded as she passed. An elderly deacon touched his hat. Even those who still frowned seemed less certain in their judgment. She rode home as fast as she dared, eager to tell Nantan. The cabin door flew open at her approach. "You should be resting," she scolded, seeing him standing in the doorway. But when she reached him, she saw he was stronger, his eyes bright with pride. "Tell me," he said simply. Alina described everything: the silence, her words, the growing support. As she spoke, sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, as if nature itself celebrated their small victory. "It's a beginning," she finished, helping him back to bed. "A chance for change." Nantan pulled her close, careful of his healing ribs. "You are braver than any warrior I have known," he murmured in her ear. Alina rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and leather. Outside, a meadowlark's evening song drifted through the window. Sweet melody of hope. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds as Alina stepped onto the cabin's porch. The morning air carried the sweet scent of spring wildflowers and fresh-turned earth. She breathed deeply, savoring the moment of peace before beginning her daily chores. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered her reverie. Sheriff Boone thundered up to their fence, his face twisted with anger. Dust billowed around his horse as he reined to a sharp halt. Elena's heart jumped, but she stood her ground, remembering yesterday's courage in the church. "Morning, Sheriff," she said quietly. "Don't you morning me," he spat, swinging down from his saddle. "You think that little show at church changes anything? Papers won't hold against power. Girl, Crow's uncle owns half this territory." The cabin door creaked open behind her. Ku Nanten emerged, moving slowly but steadily. Though his ribs still pained him, he drew himself to his full height. "My wife spoke truth before God and neighbors," he said, his deep voice calm. "The law stands with us." The sheriff's hand dropped to his gun belt. "Law. Out here, law bends to men with money and means. Best pack up while you can." Alina felt Nantan's protective presence at her shoulder. "We will not abandon our home," she said firmly. "Then what comes next is on your heads." The sheriff mounted up, wheeling his horse around. "Mark my words, fancy papers won't stop 50 armed drovers." They watched him ride away, dust settling in his wake. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she turned to Nantan. "You should not be up," she scolded gently, trying to mask her fear. "We must prepare," he replied, dark eyes scanning the horizon. "The sheriff speaks truth about one thing: papers alone will not protect us." Through the morning, their Apache neighbors arrived, bringing tools and willing hands. Men worked together to repair the trampled fences, while women helped Alina replant the destroyed garden. The sound of hammering mixed with children's laughter as the community rallied around them. Alina moved between the rows, carefully settling each seedling into the earth. With every plant, she whispered a prayer. "Lord, let it grow strong. Let it bear fruit. Let this land feed your people." Nantan supervised the digging of irrigation ditches, showing younger men how to angle the channels to make best use of the river's flow. Though he couldn't yet lift a shovel himself, his knowledge guided their work. As sunset approached, Alina wiped sweat from her brow and surveyed their progress. New fence posts stood straight and strong. Fresh-turned earth promised future harvests. The irrigation ditches would ensure water reached every corner of their small farm. "You have done good work today," Nantan said, joining her by the garden. "Your prayers bless this land." Alina smiled tiredly. "I used to think prayers were just words. But here, working this soil, I feel God's presence so strongly." Walked together to the riverbank, where a cooking fire blazed. Their neighbors had brought food to share: dried meat, fresh tortillas, wild greens. Children played nearby while adults talked in mixed Spanish, Apache, and English. The scene brought tears to Elena's eyes. "What troubles you?" Nantan asked. Softly. Not troubles, she replied, wiping her cheeks. Joy, when I first arrived, I thought God had abandoned me, that I would always be alone, unwanted. She met his gentle gaze. Instead, he led me here, to you, to this land, to a family larger than I ever dreamed possible. Nantan took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I lost my family. At Sand Creek, thought my heart would stay empty like winter ground. He touched her cheek. You brought spring back to my life. The firelight danced across their faces as they drew closer. Elena's heart quickened as Nantan bent down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss as gentle as morning dew. Real and true, flowed between them like the river beside them, strong, life-giving, unstoppable. When they parted, Elena rested her head against his chest, hearing his steady heartbeat. Around them, their neighbors smiled knowingly, some wiping away tears of their own. The peaceful moment shattered as two young Apache scouts rode hard into the firelight. Riders coming. One called out in his native tongue. Many horses, moving. Fast from the north. How many? Nantan demanded, straightening. 50, maybe more. Mikraw's uncle leads them. They carry torches and rifles. The women quickly gathered the children, dousing the fire. Men checked weapons and took up positions. Elena's hands shook as she helped clear away the cooking things. But her voice remained steady as she prayed. Nantan's strong arms encircled her. Whatever comes, he whispered, we face it together. Elena turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Together, she agreed. God brought us together for such a time as this. In the gathering darkness, they could hear the distant rumble of approaching hooves. The time for final confrontation had come. Dawn broke harsh and clear over the river bend. The morning quiet shattered as thundering hooves approached from the north. Elena's heart pounded as she watched 50 riders appear on the ridge, their rifles gleaming in the early light. She stood firm beside Nantan on their porch, one hand gripping her worn Bible, the other finding his strong fingers. The morning sun caught on rifle barrels as Mikraw's uncle led his men forward, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust. This ends today, the uncle bellowed, raising his hand to signal his men. Nantan stepped forward, his voice carrying across the distance. There need be no blood here. He kept his rifle lowered, though Elena saw the tension in his shoulders. We will share water rights if boundaries are respected. There is enough for all. The uncle's face twisted into a sneer. Share with Apache. He spat on the ground. Boys, move in and clear them out. Just then, movement caught Elena's eye. From the direction of town, wagons and riders approached. Her heart leaped as she recognized familiar faces, the preacher astride his bay mare, mothers whose children she had nursed through fever, and even some of the hesitant settlers who had kept their distance before. They formed a line between the drovers and the cabin, a human shield of townspeople standing for justice. Elena saw Mrs. Peterson, whose youngest she had saved with willow bark tea, plant herself firmly in the path of the cattle baron's men. You'll have to go through us. First, the preacher called out, his voice steady. Mikraw's uncle's face purpled with rage. Get out of my way. This is none of your concern. These are our neighbors now, Mrs. Peterson declared. The land is theirs, fair and legal. Elena stepped forward, Bible clutched to her chest. We offer peace, she said clearly. A portion of land for your cattle to cross, water rights shared fairly. But this home, this land, remains ours. The uncle sputtered, looking from face to face of the townsfolk he had once controlled. Not a single person backed down. His men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, unwilling to raise weapons against their own neighbors. This ain't over. He finally spat, but his voice held more humiliation than threat. He yanked his horse around, and his men followed. Their retreat accompanied by scattered jeers from the townspeople. Alina sagged against Nantan's side, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched their defenders come forward with smiles and outstretched hands. For the first time, they could see a future where justice prevailed without bloodshed, where mercy proved stronger than violence. The days grew softer as peace settled over the river bend. Morning after morning, neighbors appeared with tools in hand, shovels, hoes, and willing hearts. They helped Alina and Nantan restore what violence had trampled, replanting seedlings in the churned earth and mending broken fences. Under the sprawling cottonwood tree near the cabin, Alina created a makeshift school. Children gathered daily. On wooden crates and log stumps, their eager faces turned up to her like flowers to the sun. Their voices lifted in song, Spanish lullabies, English hymns, and Apache melodies blending together in sweet harmony. Little fingers traced letters in the dirt as Alina taught them to read, write, and respect each other's ways. Nantan found his own path to build bridges. He worked alongside settler men, showing them Apache methods for digging irrigation ditches that followed the land's natural flow. His quiet strength and wisdom earned grudging respect that slowly bloomed into genuine admiration. Even those who once feared him now sought his counsel on matters of water and horses. The preacher became a frequent visitor, its initial stiffness melting into genuine warmth. One afternoon, he sat with them on the porch, hat in hands. "I was wrong," he admitted, voice thick with emotion. "I let prejudice blind me to God's work in your union. Can you forgive me?" As autumn painted the cottonwoods gold and bronze, Alina and Nantan hosted another gathering by the river. This time, the crowd that gathered bore no trace of the tension that marked that first spring feast. White settlers sat shoulder to shoulder with Apache mothers. Mexican families shared tortillas and stories. Children darted between adults, switching languages as easily as stepping stones across the stream. In the deepening dusk, Elena's voice rose in the hymn she had sung alone so many months ago. Nantan's deep baritone joined hers, their harmonies, now as natural as breathing. Around the fire, heads nodded in appreciation rather than shock. Stories flowed like the river itself, tales of hardship and hope, of lessons learned and grace found. Alina leaned against Nantan's solid shoulder, watching firelight dance on familiar faces. Her heart swelled as she remembered that first day. At the stagecoach stopped the humiliation, the fear, the crushing weight of rejection. How far Providence had carried them since then. What had seemed a cruel mistake had transformed into the greatest blessing, not just for them, but for an entire community learning to see with new eyes. Winter settled over the river bend like a gentle blanket. The countryside in pristine white. The cabin, now properly chinked and sturdy against the cold, stood warm against the evening chill. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of Elena's hearty stew across the snowy yard. Inside, the transformed cabin glowed with lamplight. Elena stirred the bubbling pot, adding pinches of dried herbs from her collection hanging from the rafters. At the table, Nantan's skilled hands moved steadily over wood, carving tiny horses and dolls for the children who visited their makeshift school. Shavings curled at his feet like pale ribbons. They exchanged simple gifts, treasures made by loving hands. Alina presented Nantan with a scarf she had stitched during quiet evenings, embroidered with Apache patterns she had learned from the women. His eyes softened as he touched the careful work. In return, he gave her a delicately carved rosary cross, smooth from hours of patient crafting. A knock at the door startled them both. The preacher stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, clutching official papers in his gloved hands. "The land title," he announced warmly, "signed and registered. This place is yours, truly and legally, now." Elena's tears fell freely as she traced the official seal. "God never sends the wrong bride," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Nantan's strong arm encircled her shoulders as they knelt together on the wooden floor, giving thanks in both their languages. Children's laughter drifted through the walls, bright and clear in the winter air. Hand in hand, Alina and Nantan stepped. Onto their porch, they watched lamplight shimmer on the frozen river, its glow transforming ice into diamonds. What had begun as a cruel mistake had become their greatest blessing, a miracle of love that had transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity, more humanity.